Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this conversation about flourishing children, healthy communities, and a stronger nation, the U.S. Early Years Climate Action Task Force. I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm Joe Waters, the co-founder and CEO of Capita, and my thanks to Michelle and the team at NACCC and Eric and the team at NAFCC for bringing this conversation to all of you tonight. We have translation available tonight, interpretation available tonight in Mandarin and Spanish. And so I'd like to just pause and allow those interpreters to give instructions to those who might be joining us.
Buenas noches a todos por unirse. Este es el intérprete Jalil. Para utilizar, esta noche tenemos interpretación. Para utilizar el servicio de interpretación, por favor, van a referirse a la parte inferior de su Zoom. En el icono de globo van a seleccionar el idioma que desean escuchar. Gracias.
Wonderful. And in Mandarin.
OK， 好，欢迎大家来到我们这个研讨会。我们是关于儿童成长健康社区以及早教气候计划的。我们提供这个西班牙语和中文的翻译。如果你需要中文翻译，请点击相应的中文频道。
Great. Thank you very much. It's always nice to know where people are joining us from. And so I would also ask if you would please just put your name and location where you're calling from in the chat so that we know who is joining us tonight. And with that, I'd like to begin by asking Erica and Michelle each, why do you care about the impact of climate disruption on our young children, our providers and educators, our families, and our programs across the country? And how have you seen that climate disruption is already impacting early care and education programs, and specifically family childcare programs? So with that, Erica, if I could start with you.
Joe, thank you so much for that question and for everybody for joining us this evening to highlight what is an incredibly important issue for young children and for the early care and education programs and workforce. We have been on a learning journey in NAFCC as a part of the Early Years Climate Action Task Force. And we've really come to a better understanding of how climate change is driving some of the experiences currently being felt by family childcare educators and the families that they care for. So thank you, everybody, for joining and learning more about how this impacts all of us. And so as I travel around the country, I hear about the impact of climate change all the time, even if it's not explicitly named climate change. Family childcare educators are navigating extreme heat, preventing children from going outside or closing their programs because of heavy smoke, flooding. And so later on, I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing from several educators who are going to share their personal experiences. So I just want to briefly highlight two stories that highlight the unique impact of climate change on family childcare programs. The first was our president, the former president of the Family Childcare Home Association in Florida, and she presented to the task force. She was badly impacted by Hurricane Ian. She had roof damage, lost much of her playground, shade trees that were lifted from her house. And her car was damaged. Yet even with all of that, she only closed for 4 days, and she reopened to care for children of first responders. And she talked about how difficult it was to recover because she had to pay for much of the repairs out of pocket because of a way in which neither her homeowner's insurance or her liability insurance was covering those costs. But as the president of the association, she has focused on sharing information with other home-based childcare programs to make sure that they are prepared. And the second story I'll just briefly share comes from an educator in a rural community in Alabama. And because she lives in a very rural community, families travel for hours to get to work. And she's one of the only childcare programs in the community. And one afternoon, there was a storm that came on very suddenly, and there was a tornado warning. Her parents were alerted, but they were many hours away. And she was very worried about the limited options if the tornado came closer. Her house was fortunately left intact, but since that experience, she has been advocating and looking for ways to have a storm shelter built near her house to protect the children in her care and also be a resource to her neighborhoods. And I just share those two stories because they're important for me for a couple of things. These are also things that are evident in the report that we'll get to a little bit later. But first, family child care educators wear so many hats, are stretched thin, and sometimes overlooked for funding and support. And small or major impacts of climate change, if they are not supported, will be difficult for most family child care educators to respond to. Yet, I see educators all over the country caring for children and families who are disconnected from systems, who need the most supports. And as members of the community, they have a huge commitment and should be seen as an asset to community climate change plans. And so while there's many challenges, we know that for the family child care educators that I see, they always take challenges and are thinking about how do we make this better for our community. So that's why I care about this personally, why I feel so strongly about making sure that we're talking about being prepared and what we can do to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change.
Thanks, Erica. And I have to say that first of all, that story from Lois from the Florida Home Care Association was deeply moving to the task force, and particularly moving was her account of the responsibility she felt to get back up and in business because so many parents of the children in her program were first responders. Just speaks to the great responsibility and really the essential nature of all childcare providers, both in good times and in bad, like in the immediate recovery from a hurricane. Michelle, you were actually a member of the U.S. Early Years Climate Action Task Force, and so I'd love to hear your perspective and why NACCC cares about this issue now.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll say it's great to be here with you and Erica to spend a few minutes together to highlight findings of the work of the task force. In this season of thanks, I want to especially thank all the educators and providers joining us today, whether it's at the end of a day or nearing the end of the day. We all know that the transition back to routine after holiday is never easy for families or for educators, and it's great to be joined by so many folks from across the country for this important conversation. And thank you to the members of NACCC and NAFCC who are part of our community and conversation. I'm personally still on a high after spending time with 7,000 members in Nashville for our annual conference. Impact of climate change is important to me for two reasons. First, as a parent, I think about what I'm seeing happen to the world and what that means for my children. They have already seen, witnessed, and experienced events in our world that I did not see as a child, and many of us did not see as children. And personally, it pains me to think about what they will continue to encounter in their today, in their present, and in their future. It's alarming when you play out what we've just seen happen over the last 5 years and what that means for our next year, the next 2 years, the next 10 years. And I see for them that they're already thinking about choices that are being made that impact them. And it's personally just hard to see that. And I'm sure that I am joined by many people on this call who are parents, who are caregivers, and think about those personal impacts and what that means for them. And secondly, when I think about this issue and I think about the environments for early learning that are already so challenging with inadequate compensation, of recognition of the work and support and resources, I think about what we have learned in these conversations. Earlier this year at NACCC's Public Policy Forum, Joan Lombardi and I had the chance to sit with educators and program advocates to hear what their experiences are. And it was clear that all types of programs, family child care centers, schools, Head Start, we're all dealing with what we are seeing are impacts to our environments of early learning. Like Erica, one of the best parts of my role is visiting programs across the country. And in those travels, I've had the chance to visit with programs in all different parts of the country. And I'm delighted that a little bit later, you'll have the chance to hear from the executive director of the Open Door Preschool in Austin. It's the oldest NACCC accredited program in a city that was started by a mom who couldn't find care for her children. And now it's a beautiful program that's 50 years old that continues to provide inclusive education for their families. And in touring the program with Cynthia and meeting with the educators, the dedicated educators who are doing this work, she shared some very specific impacts of how climate has impacted their programming and what it means to deliver on developmentally appropriate practices. And it's because of her stories and stories like hers that have been shared with me and with NACCC that we are compelled to recognize and take action as we have grappled with this through the intense conversations, thoughtful conversations we had as the task force, but also as we think about the impact of the environment on our youngest learners and educators.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Let's turn to those educators if we could now. We're joined tonight by Mary Curry, Tessie Ragan, and Cynthia Smith McCollum. They are from 3 states, California, Washington, and Texas, that have been deeply impacted already by climate disruption. And so if I could maybe start with Mary and then moving to Tessie and Cynthia, what stories do you have from your own experience, right? Michelle, I think, gestured to some of that already, Cynthia, at least in your case. But maybe, Mary, if we could start with you. And let me also say that we want to hear from all of you. So feel free to share stories in the chat of how climate disruption, extreme weather events, extreme heat, and so forth have already impacted programs, facilities, and families, frankly, in the communities that you serve. Mary, if we could start with you.
Hello, everyone, and I'm so thankful that I'm here with all of you all, because you guys really care, and I appreciate the care. I appreciate the support that you take the time to listen, and not just listen to our stories, but take these stories and elevate them, and which elevates our voice, which elevates the needs for these types of conversations. In the state of Washington, it is really interesting. I was sharing with Erica earlier this week telling her that back in the day, I came to Washington State about 40 years ago, not aging myself, but a proud 60. I'm in the 60 club now. But back in the day, it was so mild. The weather was mild, but it rained. We had 2 seasons. We had rain in the fall, rain in the winter, rain in spring, but it was a little bit warmer in the summer. We would pride ourselves in understanding that there was only about 2 to 3 weeks of hot sun. So ecstatic. Now you move to where we're at right now, where we've had extreme weather changes, and the weather changing in our state is not mild anymore. We have extreme heat and extreme cold. We have ice. We have that our state hasn't, we're not prepared for in the summer time when it's hot outside and the children cannot go outside. Understanding that since our state was created and since at the beginning of Washington State, we were very mild. So our homes don't have air conditioning. So with not having air conditioning, not having those things, so the upgrades that we are trying to make now to our homes, it's unilateral, and it's across the entire state. It's not just 1 or 2 family homes that are impacted by not having air. Our homes were not created with air. Another thing that we've been impacted by, we are nestled in this beautiful trees and because of the rain, we had so many years of rain and mountains, so we had the water that would just come down from the Mount Tahoma, and we drank out of our faucets. And I've been telling people for years, I say, what, you've never drank it out of faucet water? Oh my goodness, you have to taste our water. Water is just delicious. But now our water has been contaminated by the salt water. And because of the rise of the hazards of the floods, because now our mountains are melting. So with that happening, we experience the family childcare programs, the community itself has experienced a shift to which we are all trying to be very proactive in that. We try to make sure that our children are, we create our own cooling systems within our homes. We create, we know that even if you purchase like the air conditioned units, it's going to burn out so you have to go ahead and make that type of investment. But it's being felt. The children are the children as well as the staff in the community. We're dealing with the extreme weather change. Back when I first started in the field, I used to, every family, especially that came out of a different state, because not only do we have the beautiful trees and so we have all 5 military branches within Seattle, Pierce, King County. So every family that would come to my home, I would always give them a raincoat and an umbrella, a unique umbrella, to make sure that they knew to get ready for the rain, because I tell people, used to tease that we're mole people. We don't know what to do when the sun comes out, right? But now it's like, okay, how do you prepare a family for a weather that is unknown? So those are the types of things that our families experience flooding, our schools experience flooding, as well as the heat. So that's the story of Washington State. Thank you.
Yeah, shocking in so many ways. Tessie, could we turn to you for your perspective?
Hi. So I'm located in California. I live in a desert. Ha ha ha. So last year you would not have known that I lived in a desert, because that drought that California was experiencing for like years and years and years, it just miraculously went away, but it didn't go away over time. It decided to rain all in one dump. So we are in an area where we experience extreme heat. It's so extreme that sometimes the air conditioners in our schools shut out, and which is even hotter than usual. That it's not normal desert heat. All of a sudden it's so hot that they're talking about, oh, the kids can't go to school, and all of a sudden we are dealing with mudslides. We're dealing with our roads being washed out. We can't where the military base is, where almost all of my children come from. The road was so because it's on a dry lake bed, nobody could get off base. So nobody could get off base for appointments, grocery shopping. They were actually worried about emergency personnel trying to get in and out of base, get near it, because they had no access because of that road. They would have to go all the way around just to do it, which is like an extra 20 minutes, which is a big deal if you're having a medical emergency on the base. I had to shut down my program because for the first time ever, my yard flooded, and I had no idea what to do because I was not prepared for a flood. I'm prepared for extreme heat. We have an overhang so the kids can play outside at least for 10 to 15 minutes when it's super hot. But we were not prepared for my whole yard to flood and the children not to have anywhere to play, even if they could get to my program. So now we've had to research and make sure that we actually have sandbags, because, I mean, while it is a business, it is my home. And so my business flooding, the yard flooding, means my home is in danger, which means I won't be able to provide services to the children that are in my community. So now we've had to look into sandbags, making sure that the yard is leveled. All of this costs money. So then when you're talking about all of the extra things that we need to, that I need to put out for this, is it feasible for me to have my whole yard redone so that I can make sure that if another rain like that comes through, my yard doesn't get flooded? We don't know. I guess we'll find out. So, but we're also, the other end of the spectrum is that we deal with all of the fires in this area. So every single year I have to worry if my kids can even go outside. We have an uptick in allergies. All of the children, if I have to check almost every single day to make sure air quality is good, because the rains, while they are good sometimes, if it rains a whole lot, it can bring down all of the bad stuff that's coming in from the larger cities that we are near. So air quality can affect the health of the children and their parents, and can make for a lot of absences for children. So they're not getting the high quality care that they deserve because they are experiencing so much different weather than what we experience. I mean, I don't remember. I just all of a sudden decided to redevelop my childhood asthma. Yay! After living here. So that is super fun for me. And so whenever there's a fire or a large rain, all of us are inside sick. So that is a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with, and we figured out ways to combat it. But I think partnerships with the local community and the state community, and then at a national level, just addressing this and making sure there are safeguards in place would be helpful for us. It would prevent a lot of this from happening and continuing to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And just a reminder, we want to hear your stories in the chat, so please feel free to share those. Cynthia, I'll turn it to you now.
Not all of that, obviously. We don't have mountains here in Austin, but a lot of that is familiar to us too. As Michelle shared, here in Austin in Texas in 2021, we had a huge weather event that was really damaging statewide. And at our schools, we lost some really big trees. And what that has meant in the years since is that it's been an expense, it's been a danger as these trees kind of get to the end of their lives and need to be removed. But then this summer, we really saw the final effect of that winter storm from 2 years ago, when we had the hottest summer ever. Not just of my life, there were 80 days over 100 degrees in Austin. There were 40 days, so more than one solid month, over 105 in Austin. And when you have lost more than half of the shade on your playground, you've already, in a day that hot, you're very limited to when and how you can go outside. But with no shade, it's even more limited. So yeah, 10, 15 minutes at a time on those days. And at the same time, the building is an older building for our central school. We have 3 schools. And so the windows and the doors just are not up to the challenge of insulating against 105 degrees every day. And so we're running air conditioners and freezing out our compressors and getting in trouble with our landlord, because to try to get a classroom below 80 degrees requires that you run an air conditioner at like 65 for hours in hopes that it will cool down enough at nap time that you can actually have children rest, which they desperately need because their bodies get so stressed when they go outside, even for 15 minutes when it's 108. So, I mean, you know, lots of splash days, lots of inside, figuring out inside is how it's worked for us in terms of trying to accommodate that. But at each one of our 3 schools, we have had to invest in shade, in fans, in misters. We have provided, you know, water coolers and ice makers so that we can like try to provide cooler water so that kids can, you know, keep hydrated for those short windows that they're allowed to be outside. It is, I mean, it's a daily issue when you have that sort of long-term heat wave, I guess you call it, but it seems to just be regular life now here. And at the same time, the preparedness that we need for the sorts of storms that we've experienced and potential flooding is its own separate issue. And all of those kind of line up and pile on top of each other, you know, when you are considering climate issues for us.
Thank you for sharing, and I have to say I'm deeply moved by some of the stories already appearing in the chat. Thank you for those of you who have shared some frankly harrowing experiences. Dominic, if you could bring up my slide deck, I'd like to now share with you all what the Early Years Climate Action Task Force did in producing the U.S. Early Years Climate Action Plan. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. As we have already heard, climate change is the context of all of our work. It is the framework. It is the era in which we are all living. And so, it's going to impact early care and educators just as it's going to impact everyone else across society. And given the particular vulnerabilities of young children, early care and providers and educators are going to have particular responsibility and particular challenges in this era. But there's an opportunity. We know that investing in our youngest children, their families, and the programs, services, infrastructures, and systems that support young children is critical, builds resilience, and is critical for building the resilience and adaptive capacity that we're going to need across society. So that's why the U.S. Early Years Climate Action Task Force focused on the earliest years. There's great vulnerability, but there's also tremendous opportunity when we focus on our youngest children for all of society. You could go ahead to the next slide, please. What did we mean 0 to 8? That was our focus. We know why. This audience, I don't need to tell you, but it's a period of great sensitivity and rapid growth for our youngest children and their developing brains and bodies. They're physiologically distinct, which increases their vulnerability to climate hazards. And so that's why we need to focus on this earliest stage of development. Next slide, please. The co-chairs of the task force were Diana Rauner, who's president of Start Early, former First Lady of Illinois, and Antoine Ford, who is the CEO of a company in Washington, D.C. called Enlightened, but also has been chair of the D.C. Workforce Investment Council and a very active member of the Ready Nation CEO task force on early care and education. They chaired the task force. Next slide, please. So the task force conducted 6 public listening sessions where we heard from about 45 or so people from around the country and even beyond. We heard from people who were doing work here in the United States, who were educators, who were pediatricians, who were running health systems and so forth. But we also heard stories of inspiration from around the country and, frankly, inspiration from other countries. We heard what other countries are doing to meet the challenges facing young children in this era of climate change. And just to say, all of those listening sessions are now available online. You're more than welcome to go back and to listen to them. Erica told one very inspiring story. There are about 40 other very inspiring stories, and also, frankly, as I said, harrowing stories that we need to contend with in this era. Next slide, please. So here's just a summary of the topics from those listening sessions. You can also find this all on our website, capita.org. Also, we collaborated, of course, with This is Planet Ed at the Aspen Institute, also available on their website. Their work has focused not only on the early years, but on K-12 education, and now they're leading the work of the U.S. Higher Education Climate Action Task Force. Next slide, please. So as I said, climate change is the context we're living in. Healthy, resilient children and families are the foundation of healthy, resilient communities. We need our communities and we need our country to be healthy and resilient to face the challenges of the 21st century, particularly the challenges that are going to be created as a result of climate change. And we know that investing in our youngest children and focusing on our youngest children is the key to a healthy, resilient nation. The action plan sets out these opportunities both for today and for the future. Next slide, please. So, you know, this is no surprise to any of you, but of course, our children and families around the country are surrounded by these, what we call in the action plan, child and family facing programs. They're dependent upon and greatly serve their local communities, and all of us and all of these systems are embedded within the context of a changing climate, or what we refer to often in the action plan as widespread climate disruption. Next slide. So we make recommendations, the task force makes recommendations rather, for federal, state, and local support and funding, as well as responsibility for, identifies the responsibilities that business, philanthropy, researchers, and the academic community have as well. I do want to say at this stage that while our educators and programs are at the front line of experiencing the impacts of climate change in their communities, the task force very, very clearly did not want to put the onus of fixing the challenges that we face as a result of climate change on educators, on pediatricians, on family physicians, on other practitioners. But really, it's the responsibility of federal, state, local policymakers, business, philanthropy, and so forth to surround those providers with the resources that they need to best serve our children in the context.
Very high energy today.
Next slide, please. So specifically, some recommendations for the federal government. You can read these. Of course, all of them are at US early years climate plan.us, but I just highlight a few. We know that early care and education facilities are in need of investment to begin with. These needs are only going to become these needs are only going to be exacerbated as a result of climate disruption. So, for example, in the federal recommendations in the action plan, there is a clear call for more funding to maintain and upgrade facilities, both to provide the healthy and sustainable environments that we know our children need to flourish, but also just simply to recognize that those facilities, those programs are important community infrastructure that needs to be hardened, that needs to be made more resilient in the context of climate change. Again, you can read all of these recommendations at earlyyearsclimateplan.us, but we can go on to the next slide so we can move forward to our conversation. Again, state government, this is just a smattering of some of the recommendations that the task force has made. Policies and guidance. We've been particularly interested, for example, in the responsibility of state child care administrators to provide policies and guidance in the context of climate disruption. What is the support they're providing to you all in the face of extreme heat, in the face of poor air quality days, and so forth? So we also make these recommendations to state government and to leadership at the state level. Next slide. And then, of course, locally as well. And a lot of these recommendations focus also on the built environment, on urban design and urban planning, the need for healthy, clean, safe outdoor space. So, for example, I was recently at a program in San Jose, California, and I spent 2 hours talking with parents of young children. And the thing that was loudest and clearest to me in that conversation was their focus on their kids' need for climate resilient, healthy, safe, clean places to play outside, particularly in many of our cities that are the hottest cities in the country and only getting hotter. Those places are increasingly few and far between. This is bad for our kids, bad for families, and we need to make sure that local governments take action to ensure those outdoor spaces are accessible to all. Next slide. And then early years providers. You know, how can we build climate resilience into outdoor learning spaces? How can we share information with our families? We know that early care providers, educators are among the most trusted resources for families across the country. And so when there's going to be climate disruption, they're going to be turning to you for advice, for counsel, for support, for encouragement, for inspiration. We want to make sure that you all have the resources that you need to share with families. And so we also issue a call, the task force does, on that in the action plan as well. Next slide. So that's it. That's what's there. Again, earlyyearsclimateplan.us. You can both scroll through the recommendations, download a PDF. Feel free to also share that with people in your community, with other educators in your networks, and reach out through that site. Reach out to us, reach out to NAFCC, to NACCC, for recommendations on how we might support you all in the context of this changing climate. So now I'd like to turn back to our panel. If you have questions, comments, feel free to make those in the chat. But, you know, I'd like to maybe start with the educators who are with us on our panel today. What struck you in the action plan, and maybe what is both maybe inspiring or striking, but also what do you see that we need to do next? So Tessie, Mary, Cynthia, love to turn to you all first, whoever would like to speak first.
I'll go. When I was looking at the plan and the recommendations, and I see oftentimes that, you know, we call out, our states call out Head Start and programs that are very on that entitlement. We want to make sure that the voices of family childcare and small centers are placed in a space where they understand, because when you read through the report, it does talk about the disparities and the inequalities that is embedded in where we live and how much air and how much, you know, trees. It really captures that. But when we're recommending, I definitely want to make sure. And then we're a strong voice. I love the fact that NACCC and NIAC is here so that we can join together and say, hey, our voices need to be heard to lift up this issue, because it is impacting our community, it is impacting our family, and it is impacting us. So, you know, ensuring that, you know, when we're talking, whether it's the CCDF block grant, whatever that we're calling out, additionally, ensuring that when our states do receive these recommendations, that they clearly understand that we're asking, when they're talking about jobs can be created from this act. I'm like, yes, but let's build these communities that are low in jobs as well. Let's make sure that they're getting a fair chance at receiving the jobs. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Tessie or Cynthia, immediate reactions to the action plan.
I was really encouraged, honestly, about the multiple different levels of consideration for early childhood programs, and the families that have the children that will have the, you know, the most impact in our lives are in our schools right now. So it's encouraging to think of the multiple levels. It's really easy to get stuck in just thinking in terms of education and social services. I was glad to see how broad and the different places where we could try to consider the needs that are very apparent. That's really encouraging to me, and gives me like some sense of hope that there could potentially be that much consideration, because I don't always feel that way. So that's encouraging to me, and it gives me a little hope.
Great. Tessie, any reactions from you?
Looking at the action plan, I've looked at a lot of plans where they've come up with great things and that should help the people in these specific locations, but they are really high level. They will focus on the national government or the state government, and there's not really room for the people that are actually at the ground level that are dealing with it. So with this action plan, I really liked that there was a multi-step, that you could clearly see that you're going from local to national, and that there are actual workable things that you can do at the local level that can impact the state and the national level. And then you're looking at the fact that you're not just putting this on the educators. So a lot of the times, some of these plans will come out and it really focuses on the educators having to push out the information and to gear up all of these people to care with us because because it's important. And at the end of it, the onus is really on local, state, and national. Mm-hmm. We can put out the information, but our local government needs to step in. Our state government needs to step in. The national government needs to step in. And I think that's super important when you're putting out recommendations like this. We need to make sure that we are not putting all of the education and the work on the people that are already doing the work and doing the research. It needs to be on the people that can actually get us the resources so that we can continue our work. So that is what I really liked about the action plan.
Great. So I'd like to just stay with that for a minute, if we could. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about the type of support that would be most useful, specifically for family childcare educators to not, I could say to support their implementation of the action plan, but it's really about to support them in the context of climate disruption. So like what is your message for a federal, state, local official about family childcare in the context of climate disruption? How can you be better supported?
I really feel like we can be better supported if the current regulations were written in a way that encouraged businesses and local school districts to work with family childcare educators. The way things are usually written right now, family childcare educators will make sure that their children and their families are receiving all the things that they need, that the parents have a way to contact them during emergencies, that they have all the supplies they need. But it would make it easier if the resources that are given to the public schools and everything, that we all work together and we all had a cohesive idea. An example of that would be sometimes in my area, especially in California, sometimes we are discouraged from using anywhere near the school as a location for our parents to meet during an emergency. And this could be when that might be the safest location, and now you have to ask somebody else next to you who may be experiencing the same emergency as you if you can bring all 12 of your children into their house that is not set up or safe for their children to be in. This can cause an issue that would not need to be there if the local government and the state government would work together and create an environment that included family childcare automatically and childcare centers as partners, and making sure that when these emergencies happen, we are all included and we're all being kept safe and stuff. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Mary, anything you would add to that?
Yes, we receive as family childcare providers. I'm watching the chat and listening to the hearts of the providers across saying, look, we have to be at the table. We have to be at the table. But also, besides that is, of course, that is a must. But understanding that sometimes like the regulations, just kind of like scaffolding off of what Tessie says, in our state, we're given basically a 200-pound safety procedure to carry out in the event that a child, in the event that there's earthquake or tsunami, and in our head, we're like, we're understanding, we're looking at we're following the rules. And I think that's one of the things that Family Child Cares does well. You know, we follow the rules. We're taking children in these extended hours, but the expectation for us to take a 200-pound emergency pack with us to go somewhere and camp out until a parent can actually understanding that we are the community, and understanding and lifting up that community. We serve in community and we are the community. So we want to link arms with the community, state, local, and federal.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I think that was something that came out loud and clear to the task force throughout the listening sessions, that educators are the community, in the community, but so often ignored, particularly by the people who have responsibility at the local level for climate resilience, sustainability, and planning, and emergency preparedness, and so forth. And I think one of the just immediate outcomes that I would hope to see from this action plan is that family childcare in particular, but all childcare broadly, really gets on the radar of local officials who have responsibility for climate resilience and sustainability planning. So thank you for that. You know, Cynthia, one thing that we have heard is that you know, everyone is stretched. We all do not have the capacity to do all the things that need to be done on behalf of children and families in the era in which we're now living. And so the argument we've sometimes heard is we shouldn't even be thinking about climate change. I'd just love to get your response to that, right? How should we be thinking and frankly advocating for ourselves, for our children and families, to get the capacity that is needed when already the capacity is so limited?
Well, I will say that I don't think thinking about about climate change is, and apologies, I'm sorry, I have dogs and people coming in, but I don't think that thinking about climate change is separate from childcare and educating young children, because anyone who has dedicated their lives to young children is so focused on the future. They are all about trying to build the little people and the big brains that are going to go out into the world and, you know, make our future possible. So I think there's plenty of room for overlap in thinking about and advocating for childcare and climate change together, because they are both so very future focused and about preparing for that. I think that the main thing that we need to do is just ensure that our interests are part of that conversation locally and at other levels. So I think that it's looking for those places of overlapping advocacy that we can advocate for the young children that we serve and for the future that they are inheriting at the same time. I think that's maybe the best approach for us to think as educators about this issue, because it's really about covering all of it. You know, we're already living with the impacts and we see how it affects our children. But what we want to do is, to what you said is, I wrote it down, build the resilience and the adaptability and ensure that we're part of that conversation at every level we can be.
Right. Michelle, Eric, I'd love to bring you all back into the conversation and just reflect on this capacity question and the advocacy that needs to happen to get the capacities that this sector needs to both withstand what is inevitable in terms of climate disruption, but also, frankly, to make the contribution that Cynthia just pointed us to of building the resilience and adaptive capacity of society as a whole. Michelle, maybe you could start.
Thanks, Joe. As Cynthia, Mary, and Tessie have made clear, providers unfortunately don't have much of a choice whether or not they're able to tackle the impacts of climate change. They're dealing with its effects in their programs and communities, and the children and families they serve are increasingly experiencing these challenges and stressors that come from living in the rapidly changing environment. And as some folks have highlighted in the chat, they need support to help address and mitigate the impacts of climate change in their own programs in the communities they serve, both in terms of technical assistance and financial resources. And it's, to me, incumbent on organizations like NACCC and NAFCC and our national and state partners in this work to help develop these resources and amplify these voices, the voices that are here, the voices of educators like those who have joined us today in policy conversation at all levels, so our leaders can understand how the youngest children in their communities and the people that care for them are being impacted by climate change and what they need. It's the people who are caring for them, they need and can share effectively what is needed to respond. And I feel very proud for the work that was done by this task force. The Early Years Action Plan is a great start, and we still have a long ways to go, but we're committed to continuing to work in partnership to elevate the needs and the experiences of early educators in all settings to make sure that their voice is heard at the table.
Thanks, Michelle. Erica.
It was so great to hear Tessie, Cynthia, and Mary speaking about their solutions and their ideas. And just to build on that quickly, because I know we're coming to the end of this, we know we have the ideas, we have the expertise, we have strengths within our childcare programs. There is a gap of funding, of connections, making sure that we're able to influence decisions. And so I've been really positively moved by some of the funding and opportunities for resources that I have seen go to childcare programs around the climate work. And there was a question about grants. I don't know all of them, but I certainly do know that one of the partners in the task force, LIF, was involved in work that mapped out climate vulnerability, and they were also able to make some grants to support family childcare programs in New York City that had been impacted by climate. And so we are seeing more opportunities for funding. It has to be simple. If it's not, then we need to provide navigators and people to support doing those applications. They need to be available in multiple languages, and it needs to be, something that somebody who has lots of different hats is able to apply and get funding. So we know we have ideas. We are full of them in early care and education, and just going out and sharing them and really making it clear for others who do have funding that early care and education is a place where we can make a difference with that money for children and families. So I think that gets to some of the grant questions. Joe, I don't know if you have any more specific thoughts, but just to kind of bring those two ideas together.
Yeah, I would just add, Erica, and I think that's absolutely right what you said, but I would just add that in this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, we have seen the largest piece of climate change related legislation that has ever been passed anywhere in the world, and that's the Inflation Reduction Act. And in collaboration with our partners at Start Early and This is Planet Ed at the Aspen Institute, earlier this year, we did release a resource around Inflation Reduction Act opportunities for early years providers. And hopefully we can get that in the chat as well here in the next few minutes. But that outlines some of the, frankly, opportunities that are still out there for providers, and many of them are direct pay opportunities. And so, there are opportunities out there that have often been flagged as climate opportunities, but we need to make sure that we're getting those grants, those resources that are climate opportunities into early care and education. So hopefully more still coming on all of that. In the last few minutes here, there was also a very interesting question from Ed Green. Ed, glad you could be with us tonight. We know that Black Americans are disproportionately impacted by climate change, thanks to redlining and other systemic injustices. Climate vulnerability is increased given where people live and so forth. And as Ed rightly points out, Black Americans are often left out of these conversations, and there are relatively few Black Americans leading on climate overall. So I'd love if just any of our panelists would like to address, maybe from the perspective of the action plan or the task force, how we might actually use this as an opportunity to further address historic inequities and discrimination.
I thank you for the question. Yes, in I mean, from the George Floyd movement to Black Lives Matter to there's all of these uprisings of momentum to illustrate COVID, and we saw how death impacted education. It's like they're creating a system or a voice that's going to, I think NACCC and NIAC will be able to support the voices that have not traditionally been heard, because they're lifting up us as a community as a whole, but they're also not negating the fact that these disparities exist, and they continue to trouble the waters of which we live in. So I think that us being here today is a testimony of how we need to move forward. And I think the act and all of the research that has been done and who it's been done by, for the people. Because until we get this right, there's no way we can continue to support other venues and as we move forward, we have to, there's no way that we can't grow unless we're growing together. So for me, I'm sitting here listening, going, yes, I'm fighting for this climate because I'm fighting for my children and my children's children. And I think the rest of us, the ones who are standing strong, we're going to continue to do so. So I'm thankful for this opportunity, and I'm thankful for the research that was put into this entire report. I'm definitely going to share it out every chance I get, and I sit on a lot of committees, so I'm definitely going to share it out. So thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I will just add on that quickly. Absolutely, we need to reclaim climate change and environment in the Black community. My great grandparents, they lived in very rural community and worked side by side with their indigenous brothers and sisters in Virginia, and lived off of the land and had a deep respect, appreciation for that. And so I agree. I think we need to talk about climate in a way that resonates with different communities and does not make it seem like it is something coming from an academic institution or that is not in touch with our communities, but this is in line with the values that we see for our communities. And so I think we have a lot to go. And at Green, thank you for your work. We'll look into that and maybe giving us some tools to further that.
Great. There's just one more question. Oh, sorry, Tessie, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, I think the biggest thing that could be done is the intentional inviting of the community leaders from the most affected areas, because while we want to make sure that all of these things are given to the Black community and to all the communities, sometimes you're going to need to send out specific and direct invitations to the leaders, because the leaders of the communities are going to be the ones that are going to help with this work. And so we can't send out people to be leaders in these areas. They already have leaders. We need to pull their leaders in and have them and help them get the word out. That's what we should be focusing on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. There's a question here that I think it's important to not miss around curricular resources on climate change for young children, for early care and education. Erica, Michelle, do those exist? Are they coming? Is there a way that we can support educators with curriculum resources around this issue in particular?
So at the conference we just had, I had a number of folks who actually came up and shared that they were presenting information about how to talk with children about the impacts of environmental change. So I don't have a name off the top of my head, but I know that there is active work by educators who are seeing, what is being asked by families and children, and thinking about how we can help provide supports for families and children in being able to address this. We have some articles in Young Children that have addressed lifting up some of the ways that educators are having these active conversations and supporting young children in terms of their curiosity.
Great. Erica, anything you'd add?
I think that is great. We absolutely do need a curriculum around it. What I will say is that family child care educators, all educators have, unfortunately built a lot of tools for addressing trauma, for addressing change in the environment for children, whether it's related to climate or health and safety. And so we do see really loving ways that educators will bring back children after episodes like this, drawing, storytelling, really being supportive of the entire family. And I know that you all will continue to do that, and we'll continue to look for resources to support that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And I would just add, Anya Kamenetz, who used to be an education reporter for NPR, has now basically devoted this phase of her career to building out resources to talk with children and young people about the emotions that are experienced as a result of climate disruption and displacement and so forth. So you all might want to check out as well Anya Kamenetz's work. We are over time. I am so grateful for this conversation, so grateful to our panelists and speakers, to our interpreters, to NAFCC, to NACCC for the collaboration to bring this to you all, and to all of you for taking an hour out of your day to talk about something that is so important for our future, but it's an hour out of your day, right? And so thank you so much for taking this time to do something and to have this very important conversation. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Bye-bye.